I'm going to talk about the found science of meat and how food biotech is creating new concepts of meat. But first, I'll say a little bit about the mitigation project, which is also punning. We saw so many puns with these food companies. So the mitigation project is still going. So we're finishing in the fall of 24, in October 24. Our main goal is to explore how meat is embedded in Norwegian food practices and to figure out ways to promote sustainable meat use in Norway. How do we understand sustainable meat use? Sorry, I guess I have to use this one. We have articulated 3 R's for sustainable meat use that are recognizing the animals and the people who are involved in making meat, replacing animal-based protein with plant or insect-based or other lower climate impact alternatives, and refining how we use animal-based protein to adjust our use to our needs and to minimize waste and loss, as well as malnutrition, including obesity. The project itself is a social science, humanities, and arts project. We are approaching food and meat as culture. It is interdisciplinary and it's also transdisciplinary, going beyond the academy to involve industry partners, such as the retailer Menu, food producers Grønne Folk, and others. We have a 4-year plan that was extended also COVID pandemic and various public engagement activities. Maybe you've come across at least the exhibition that we have now showing More Meat, Less Meat at Trondheim Kunstmuseum in Grønmølna. We actually have an event this Sunday with Stephen Barstow, who is an urban gardener, or at least certainly a Trondheim gardener, and has been eating of his garden for the last 20 years. So please do join us in the museum and learn how to eat your gardens. And we're also working on a cookbook called Eat Like Your Grandparents, working with the idea and based on the research evidence that our meat consumption has doubled in the last 50 years, working with the idea that we can find resources in the past for how to actually reduce meat consumption. And of course, a lot of research and collaboration among us. The project is organized in 4 work packages, one on history and philosophy and science and technology studies on founding meat, a work package looking at consumers and practice of eating meat, and actually households. Provisioning meat works with farmers and industry stakeholders, and transforming meat is where our art-based interventions and experiments with trying different diets have been happening. So today I'm focusing on the first work package, and specifically on the question of what the impact of technology is on values around meat use and climate. Now, my culinary inspiration here and product beyond meat. So I was super fascinated with these sausages. I'm one of these people who don't eat meat, but I still like the taste of meat, unlike several vegetarians I know. So this product for me was very juicy, meat-like. And as a philosopher, I became especially fascinated because this product was not marketed as plant sausage, actually as plant-based meat. So we see here in Ethan Brown's we hope our plant-based meats allow you and your family to eat more, not less, of the traditional dishes you love, etc. And by the way, this is not synthetic meat. These are meats already in the market. You've probably already tried some. They are based on processing or working with plant-based proteins. So my question as a philosopher was, how do plants get to be meat? How can we get this idea of a plant-based meat? Of course, the answer is complex because it involves several other processes happening that contribute to the very possibility of these types of products. One one possible contributing factor being our distancing and invisibilizing of animals and animal farming and agriculture, what I've dubbed effacing animals, which though I think ironically makes space for us to get rid of the animal altogether. What Rob also sort of gestured to when he was talking about this ultra processing of the food and basically the industrialization of the food system. So another perhaps barrier is how we are socially performing meat. And one thing these products are doing is that they are matching, even though they're niche products in some ways being plant-based, they are working to match the social performances of meat. And we see them in advertisements being grilled or as part of fast food, macho-ized in several ways. There's a lot of research on meat and gender, pioneered by Carol Adams in her 1990 book, The Sexual Politics of Meat. I've also written about performing meat and meat replacement as drag, by analogy to how gender is shaken by drag. I'm thinking of meat replacement, shaking meat concepts. And also, of course, the business push behind this is significant. But what is really important and at stake here is that this industry, currently the meat and dairy industry, has a massive impact on our planet. So I've selected this image from the Meat Atlas to demonstrate that, even though it doesn't talk about climate emissions or anything, it just lists the number of animals killed in 1 year in 2011. And this is, of course, old, and meat consumption has increased since then. So we see that in 1 year, we killed more than 58 billion chicken, more than 1 billion pigs, more than 2 billion ducks, and the hundreds of millions of other animals. And this is in 1 year. So you can imagine what resources we are using to raise these animals, to make them mature, and then, of course, how much suffering we're causing in doing this in an industrial and concentrated, confined manner, and then killing all these animals. And part of the industrialized mode of production is that we are feeding these animals concentrated feeds that are actually very protein-rich plants that humans could be eating instead. So all these, claims about just food, or they're coming from this phenomenon. And so at the same time, the face of our planet is changing. There's only 4% wild mammals now living on Earth, and the rest of 96% of mammals on the planet are made up of human and livestock animals, and the majority of that is livestock. So back to my question, and here comes the philosophy. So I want to bring into this picture of how these products are becoming possible, the role of science. And so I think that a key aspect of how we get plants to be meat is science-based conceptual innovation. And I analyze this as a case of what I call found science. So what is found science? It is defined by analogy to a practice in art called found art. Perhaps you've seen these types of objects in museums. Found art was pioneered in the early 20th century by artists like Marcel Duchamp, to whom this artwork was initially attributed before figuring out that it was another artist, Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, who he probably borrowed from. So the radical thing about found art is that it brings into the art context objects that are not in any way originally artistic, like a urinal. So this is not a beautiful art object, but the claim of found art is that it can be installed and can be appropriately positioned and displayed so as to evoke these types of properties in everyday ready-made objects. Found science is defined by analogy to analyze these practices that we see in science, in social science, and natural science, whereby we bring everyday ideas that are not in any way scientific into the context of making science and doing science. So finding and founding are social, material, epistemological processes, which involve transfiguring these everyday ideas to make them fit with ontologies and practices that we already have in a given scientific domain. I've written about this with the case of race concepts and how they're used in population genomics or in social epidemiology and transfigured into scientific concepts. I've written about well-being and how that's become an economics concept, and knowledge and how that's become a computational management, a systems biology, well, computational knowledge management concept. So what about meat? I think the same thing is happening with meat. So we start with an everyday idea of meat as basically, if we follow this survey by Hansen et al., as muscle parts of animals. And what do we do with that concept? Well, look to what we do with meat. We cut it, we cook it, we chew on it, we taste it, it's yummy, it smells a certain way, it looks a certain way. So how can we articulate that using our scientific concepts? Well, we'll talk about the structure of the meat, the fibrous structure, for example, its composition, its functionality or mouthfeel, its flavor, odor, and appearance. So the science of meat analogs already goes back to thousands of years ago. If we consider some of the original tofu, etc., products as replacements. But what we can say, at least for the first generation of plant-based meat analogs designed in the science context, is that they approximate or try to emulate the structure of meat fibers. But the second generation of plant-based meat and impossible foods are designed to emulate also the taste and the color of meat. How does this happen? Let's focus on fiber. I'm going to try to go fast here, so I hope you're with me. So the structure of muscle fiber is quite fractal. So we see within the skeletal muscle, we have epimycelium fibers and then muscle fascicles. Within these muscle fascicles, we have muscle fibers. Within the muscle fiber, we have sarcolemas, and all of these things look like stringy fibers. Plant proteins, on the other hand, are often globular in structure. So here you see a globular in figure 2, globular proteins in plant materials. What is happening when we are processing plant-based proteins to look like or approximate the structure of meat is that we're putting them through a process of hydration, applying heat and water, then heat and shear, so movement to unfold these bundled up proteins. Then we orient them, stretch them, shear them in specific ways, and cool them so that they can reconnect and make new bonds in a linear shaped protein. And there are different technologies for doing that. Some of the standard ones are the extruder. So you put in the material in the feed section, and then there's this processing. Actually, this was originally used to process what would we go, like it's like a pasta maker. You can think of it as a pasta maker. So you put in the material, and then it stretches it and it sort of makes it into the shape that you want. But then also there's more innovation in this field of texturizing vegetable protein, and one of the most recent in the 2000s development was the Couette cell technology, and shear cell technology, where we see different concentrations of materials and how they would be sheared and what kinds of fibers they create. And yeah, just to also kind of point this out, the steak here, which is a sort of golden, what we call it, like the vision here of how could you actually texturize this protein, make it fibrous, and also make it long, right? Long enough, like a steak. And here we see Birgitte Deckers from Wageningen and co-founder of Rival Foods holding one of her babies, this plant-based steak. So, so my claim here was that work within plant-based biotech is crucial here. It involves founding everyday ideas of meat as animal muscle in the science of meat analogs. And that's what I would call, in my philosophical frame, found science. I focused on how meat is founded in food science by looking at its structure. And what I want to kind of finish with is this kind of caution. There is an interplay, of course, between science and everyday life and everyday practice. Science borrows and founds these everyday ideas and transfigures them and then throws them back at us, right, as meat. So in this case, however, we have to be careful because these new meat concepts, these founded meat concepts, may not be or not match exactly our everyday ideas of meat. So they are fitting the ontology and practices of food biotech and science, but perhaps not yet everyday meat practices. So some of our research and mitigations shows that meat eating is quite resistant and sort of people are attached to their meat. So molecular reductionism, you know, and this kind of approach to making meat may not be sufficient to align yet with these social food practices and performances of meat, and especially of the notions of what we have as natural or healthful food, even if actually, you know, processed meat products already, you know, are arguably not very natural. I mean, just look at how animals are farmed in these intensive farms, and not very helpful. So thank you for this. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm open to your comments and questions.